Hello, everybody, and welcome to the live stream. Of course, as people have pointed out, I probably confused people across in the US because we don't change the clocks until end of the month, and you change earlier, so we have a slight time difference. Hopefully, the various alerts that go out will get people knowing that we've started theoretically an hour earlier. Thanks so much again for joining the live stream. If you're here, I've seen loads of people, loads of questions coming in. Just a couple of things before we get going. First of all, thanks very much if you're joining live. Remember, the entire content of the live stream is determined by you. So keep posting your questions. I'll try and get through all of them, certainly as many of them as I can. And this is a really big week, of course, with so much happening in the world of cruising. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions around that. If you're watching afterwards, if you're watching the playback, which humongous amounts of people do, which is fantastic. So your questions are really important because that helps. And remember, you can keep skipping through and finding questions that apply to you. If there's any that you don't want, don't just stop watching. For those of you who are new here, although I see lots of very familiar faces, I'm Gary Bembridge. My channel is Tips for Travelers. My goal with the channel is to try and make it easier to find, plan, and have those amazing cruise vacations that we all dream of. And a lot of us, certainly if you're kind of US-based, UK-based, a lot of us, looks like our dreams are about to become, much more of a reality. So we might get kind of stuck a little bit into that. Let me just recap what's happened for those of you who aren't 100% aware, although hopefully many of you are. In the UK, cruising will be starting up with a huge amount of lines as we head into summer. Some sort of starting in May, but most of them starting from June through into July and running until the end of September. So at the moment, we have confirmations from P&O Cruises. They actually go on sale on Monday morning, 8 a.m. at UK time. We have confirmation from Princess Cruises. They go on sale, and I can't remember the date. I think it's a Wednesday they go on sale, if I remember correctly. We have Cunard coming on sale. They're only coming on sale at the end of the month. We also know that Viking are going to be sailing from May. They're only currently promoting to their loyalty members. We also have MSC Cruises, which is hoping to start in May. And then we've also heard that Hurtigruten is going to do it, Fred Olsen are going to do it, and we're waiting to hear what Celebrity, Royal Caribbean, etc., who would you have ships here, are going to do. Across North America, what does Caribbean count North America? But anyway, across that way, of course, we have Crystal, which will be sailing out of Nassau and Bimini from June. We now have Royal Caribbean, who also will be sailing out of Nassau with Adventurers of the Sea, and we have Celebrity sailing out of St. Martin with Celebrity Millennium, which has just been all revamped and tarted up with their Revolution, or whatever it's called, process. So lots and lots of options, and we'll get into, I'm sure, the different questions about what you can and can't do. To make it very simple, the only cruise lines which have said no vaccinations at this point in time by adults are MSC Cruises, which is going to rely 100% on testing, and Viking Cruises, which are going to rely on testing. All the other lines in various permutations have kind of vaccines as part of it, and I'm sure we'll get into that much more. So that was a quick jog through the various what isn't happening. And the thing I keep saying, I've just been making a video actually, which talks a little bit, goes into more detail about things to think about and the differences and some kind of big watch outs. But one of the things I'm pretty sure is going to happen is by the time that video goes live, we're going to see more lines coming along. We know Morello's made noises in the UK. It'll be interesting to see what the Carnival group are going to be doing across North America, Caribbean way, because obviously the Caribbean group made their first moves, but Carnival have 3 lines opening up in the UK. They already have, of course, 2 lines in Europe with AIDA and Costa. So it seems likely they're likely to do something, but certainly the rollout of the vaccines as we head towards June is definitely, cruise lines are looking for countries that are prepared to work with them, like Israel have done. So let me just go back and pick up on a couple of points that have raised. Michelle has raised a point which is, of course, causing a lot of people a lot of angst, is around vaccines. What about people who can't get the vaccine because of medical reasons? Maybe it's been discussed before, so I missed it. I have mine already, but my husband can't because of leukemia. So Michelle, the vaccine issue is obviously causing a lot of angst and a lot of concern around the place. And it varies a little bit But basically what we've seen is all those lines that are requiring vaccines are saying there will be, I'm going to talk about one exception, which we're not 100% sure on yet, but all those lines in the UK that are requiring vaccines are saying there's no exceptions. So if you can't have, won't have, or won't have it in time, then you can't sail with them. So, for example, in the UK, the goal is to have all adults offered their first vaccine by sort of June time or so, July time, which I think is the same in the United States. However, of course, that's only first vaccine, so a lot of people will probably at best be able to get the later ones. But certainly all over 50s will have their first vaccine done by the end of this month, and then they will have their second one in time for these cruises. So it's interesting, some of them are starting much later. So for example, Cunard are only starting sailing in July. The Israel cruises, again, you have to be early vaccinated. Now, the only interesting thing is in the announcement from Celebrity and Royal Caribbean for their two cruises, sorry, and the same is true of Crystal, by the way. So when the Royal Caribbean and Celebrity, it did basically say that all adults, so everyone over the age of 18 would have to be vaccinated. However, in the real detail of the announcement, it's buried a thing which says if you can't be vaccinated, you should contact their special needs department. It's called, and there's an email address which I can dig out if you like, but I think it's something special _needs at Royal Caribbean or something. But I can look up the email address. Or if you actually go to the Royal Caribbean blog, they have, there's an article there which Matt, who runs that, has done, which refers to that. So maybe I'll also put a link to that in the show, in the actual notes to this afterwards. So there is some suggestion that there may be some dialogue possible on that, but pretty much everyone else has said it's you know, if you can't have it, unfortunately, they're not going to let you cruise at this time. It's also very important to note that all of the lines have said this vaccination rule applies on these specific cruises, these new cruises, these summer cruises, which are only scheduled to run until September. But all the other cruises they're running after September, so as we hit October, November, December, do not have the vaccine rule, certainly at this point in time. So Michelle, one of the things I would say is you may find that these summer startup cruises, your husband won't be able to travel on. Double check that the special needs link. But after that, they're saying it's less likely. Now, of course, we don't know what will happen, and I'm sure there'll be much more dialogue as cruising opens around what is physically going to be possible, because that's going to be much more of an issue. The other thing which I just want to touch on is really important, which I think, having looked at a lot of the stuff on social media, people haven't really quite understood. These cruises are not just about the vaccine thing. The actual protocols are pretty rigid. So they are going to have masks. They are going to have social distancing. You are going to have a test before you get on board, which is a clear, agreed thing. They are at reduced capacity. You might have to book to go to things. So some of the cruises are going to be calling on ports. You're going to have to go on cruise line only excursions in those ports. So in the ones in the Caribbean, we haven't heard what's going to happen with the ones in the UK yet. So all of those protocols are staying. Now, of course, what they're saying is they may get lifted, but there's that issue of vaccine, but there's also those protocols, which of course a lot of people definitely would want to also hold back on it. I don't think a lot of people, just reading on social media, they haven't really kind of digested that whole thing. Now, as I mentioned before in the post, I also keep an eye on all the questions, probably to make sure it's running well, on here, because up here not all the questions come. So let's just have a look, and we'll sort of go through them in order now. I'll jump back. So Nigel, I got a feeling that you asked a question last week, which I didn't get to, I only saw it afterwards, about Queen's Grill experience, and have I got much experience with Queen's Grill? And if it's not you, I apologize, but I'll pick up that because it's linked to the Cunard question. I've got good experience on the Queen's Grill. I've done, if I look at all the days I've spent on a cruise ship, I've probably spent more total number of days on Queen's Grill in the different Cunard ships than I have on any other ship. And the reason for that is I've done a couple of transatlantics, and I've also done 10 weeks of a world cruise and 5 weeks of another world cruise. And they were all in Queen's Grill. Queen's Grill is fabulous. It's a beautiful service. The restaurant is magnificent. It really is fantastic. The cabins, suites, I guess you call them, are brilliant. The only downside I would say is that other than you have a nice, a big cabin that you're paying for, and you have beautiful restaurants, and depending on the ship you're on, if you're on Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, you have right at the top, you have sort of a Queen's Court area with a little lounge and stuff. But other than that, there's no other kind of perks or benefits. So if you take a look, say, at MSC Cruises with Yacht Club, or even some of the stuff that Celebrity are doing, or if you've got like the Haven, for example, that you've got on Norwegian, it's kind of less special in some ways because it's not the sort of ship within a ship. But overall, it is magnificent, and the food is fantastic. You can order whatever you want, and so on. So Nigel's saying we booked on Cunard Queen Victoria 2022. I assume you're meaning. I thought you meant the on the World Cruise. We're wondering, do you think we could transfer our deposit to a staycation cruise announced for this summer? Now, one of the great things about all of these startup cruises, and also more generally, is the cruise lines are being pretty flexible about movements. So what I've seen Cunard say is basically you can move as much as you want without penalty. So if you want to move, you should be able to move, because certainly that is what they've said. Now, I've had quite a few Cunard things cancelled and rescheduled and moved around. So I've moved a lot of stuff. Then I also wanted to move bits around. The only watch out is if that is with future cruise credit, they are being more pernickety about moving bits of future cruise credit and combining future cruise credit. So if it's one lump sum of future cruise credit, you can normally move that. So I would say your chances of being able to move that are extremely high based on that policy of being able to move stuff around. They've also reduced their final payment date, I think through to October now, to 30 days. So they are certainly pretty flexible on that. So you or your agent should definitely be able to do that. Great to see lots of other YouTubers are here. We've got, of course, Paul and Carol was John, which is fantastic. Andy and Kirsty, who are very active across social, etc. They're here. So let's have a look. One of the great things, actually, since we started these I started these live streams, so I started last year, and even this year, is it's all been about, up until now, when will we start? Something's been cancelled, and it's so great that we can talk about, planning trips and looking at trips and getting great, questions like from we've had about, can we shift deposits because you want to go sooner, or hypnotherapy for you about penthouse. So let's have a look. We booked a penthouse veranda on Viking Venus for a UK trip in June. What's your opinion of the ships? Only 450 on board, so looking forward to that. The Viking ships are absolutely beautiful. What's interesting with their ships is they are all the same. So I think Venus is now their 7th ship. But unlike other cruise lines, they sort of change things. The ships are all the same because I guess they found a formula that worked. The ships are very beautiful. They're very stylish. They've got very nice areas to them. The cabins are very nice. The one thing I haven't done, because it keeps getting cancelled, is I haven't cruised with them. I've only toured their ships and spoken to lots of people who've been on their ships. Now, theoretically, my first Viking cruise is in June, which won't happen because it's from Venice to Athens. So unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But they're beautiful, beautiful ships, really nicely laid out. Of course, lots of stuff's included. It really is. They are absolutely magnificent, very, 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 very beautiful ships. I saw something around. Sorry, I'm scrolling down too fast. Loads and loads of questions coming in, which is great. So, great. So Paul's saying some lines are offering cruises to nowhere. Will they have many passengers? Would they need the same protocols if guests are vaccinated? So a couple of points there. So the cruises to nowhere are being offered, all the P&O stuff. So cruises to nowhere. So that's both on Britannia, which is sailing sort of Channel Islands, away from them quickly. Iona, which is doing one up to Scotland, just on their maiden up to the island of Iona, and then they're going to be basically the French coast. What they talk about is chasing the sun, basically. And Cunard is starting with, the Princess is starting with cruises to nowhere on Regal. Later on, they're hoping to add longer cruises with ports and different embarkation ports and MSC, etc. So it's really hard to know how many people are going to go because there's a lot of capacity. We also don't know what capacity they're sailing at. So I've been trying to find out what capacity they're sailing at, and I haven't been able to find out what capacity. The only thing we do know is in the rest of the world, it's been between sort of 50% and 60% capacity. We also know that none of the cruise lines are selling inside cabins or ocean view cabins. They're only selling balcony cabins. So straight away, all of that capacity is taken out. So we also don't know just how full these, how much capacity they need on these ships or will have available on those ships. Nobody really knows what demand is going to be. I think what's really important, I think demand will be pretty strong in the UK. I don't think it's going to be massive. And the reason I say that is, obviously, there's all the cruising people who want to go, and there's lots of people in here already. They're going to want to go. Travel from the middle of May at the moment is likely to no longer be illegal. However, all the places that people want to go to, Spain, Greece, France, etc., they are, as we've seen in the papers today, they're heading into third wave, and they're going in. It is gone to lockdown. Germany's gone to further lockdown. No, sorry, France has gone to further lockdown. Spain's had a 30% increase in cases over the last week, and so on and so forth. So it's increasingly, it's interesting, the messaging has become more and more like traveling abroad is looking more and more unlikely, even though we may be able to do it. So we're waiting, obviously, for the middle of April. So I think one of the big questions will be, is people are going to be looking for stuff to do more locally. One of the things I think is quite attractive about the cruises to nowhere initially is you're going to go into that bubble. So the first time we're going to be traveling for 18 months, I guess, by the time this starts, is one of the things that certainly appeals to me a little bit is you're going to get onto the ship, so you're going to have your vaccine, you're going to be tested, you're going to get on the ship, and they're going to be able to really monitor kind of the bubble, as it were. So you are going to be in a bubble. So certainly as it starts, it feels kind of quite an attractive proposition. But I think you're right. How many people will want to go? So they've done these 3-nighter and 4-nighters initially to try and compensate for that. But the cruises, as we get more into August and into September, are starting to get longer, up to 7 nights, and start to include ports. Particularly Scottish ports, because Scotland is basically not opening on the same timescale. So it's a long way of saying, obviously, I don't know the answer, but I think it will be very interesting. Monday is going to be the really big test, because that's when P&O go on sale. So we'll get a much better read from that. Of course, they have to fill a lot of capacity, because if you think Britannia are doing 3 and 4 nights, so there's a lot of cruises there to fill. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be quite good. I don't think it's going to be a runaway. We did see, of course, Crystal put their stuff on sale in the first day. They sold 25% of all available berths in their first day. It was their best booking day they've had as a company ever. So they sold I think they had 4,000 people booking in day one, 25% capacity gone. So of course, I don't know if that's 20% of the reduced capacity or what. So it's definitely an element of that. Jack's asking, well, any cruise line home port in Cozumel? Clearly what the cruise lines are looking at now is they're looking for ports where they can do more home basing. So we've seen St. Martin so far, Bahamas. Now, Bahamas originally had said that, I saw an interview with the Premier, whose name I forget, and he spoke about they were talking to 3 lines. I'm guessing because of pure capacity, availability of flights, maybe they'll put on bigger planes or whatever, just flights in and out, just processing people in and out of Nassau, both land and for these cruises. So sounds like they can maybe handle another ship out of there. Bahamas is pretty nimble at handling cruise lines home porting there, and so we're not seeing many at the moment until later in the year. Cozumel's a very interesting one, because Cozumel's made quite a few noises about home porting. Cozumel is actually going to be one of the ports that the celebrity cruises call on, but it's interesting they chose St. Martin, not Cozumel as a home port. Now, St. Martin does have a little bit more infrastructure. It has a really big kind of airport there. So it's interesting that they chose St. Martin from a connection. Cozumel seems much more of a stretch, and certainly they were making lots of noises about trying to attract people, but I'm not sure the infrastructure's there. But it will be interesting to see which ones pop up. I would have thought more would do Barbados, because they definitely, a lot of the European lines home base in Barbados during the winter season there. So Cozumel one to watch. It feels infrastructure-wise much more of a challenge, because obviously the logistics getting people in and out and supplies and stuff. Interestingly, I was trying to look at, building on your question, at which Caribbean islands the cruise lines were using during the shutdown to bring crew in and out. And St. Martin was a very active place where they were bringing relief crew. You know, obviously they had much fewer crew, but St. Martin was one of the places that they were using to turn around crew quite a lot. So we'll have to see which happens. Cozumel was not one of those that they were using. Now, bear in mind, they were also using St. Martin then as a refueling, supplying place as well, because during the CDC shutdown, under the CDC rules, in order to go into any of the ports, so Miami, Port Canaveral, or whatever, to replenish, you had to get past certain hurdles. So most of the cruise lines pulled out of that area, pulled out of US waters, and then started using some of the Caribbean islands. So it's interesting which ones they were or weren't using. So Bahamas, Barbados, St. Martin. So it's a long way of answering. It feels kind of a stretch. Lots of people asking around. Lots of people ask me about Hawaii cruising. Something I would really like to do. And a lot of people have sent me both emails and comments on the site around what about November, what about December, and so on. Of course, nobody really knows. Critical thing would be is when do we think the CDC will allow cruising to resume, because that's obviously key before anything can happen in Hawaii. I think it's very, very interesting that if you look at the cruises that have been established in the Caribbean and the ones that have been established in Europe, they're all planning to run up until September, with, as I mentioned earlier, that September period being port start cropping up much more. The cruise lines have always said Q4 onwards. So a lot of people criticized me early on when I was running videos saying, like, don't really book this year unless you're doing Q4 onwards, because that's what the cruise lines are telling agents and things. So I think there's much more optimism. And if you think about the whole process of vaccine rollout, not only in the sort of Western world, but also a lot of countries they call on, they're more likely to be up and running by then. Also, very importantly, if you look at the US, there is quite a long lead time to resume. So once the CDC finally issues its technical specifications for test cruises, which it hasn't done and has no indication when they're doing that, it's going to take 30 days before you can run a test cruise. So say if they get the information, say by the end of March, they have to apply to run a test cruise, which they have to give at least 30 days notice. So that takes you to the end of April. Once they run the test cruise, say they run the test cruise in May, they then have to then apply for a license, which is going to take another 60 days. So that's June, July. So you're heading into that August, September time period. So then, so it feels like the US is probably not going to open to any degree to that time. And I think also the lines in the UK are saying that. So long way of saying, is it a good bet? It seems increasingly likely, I would say. And certainly I'm much more confident about those cruises. I have an Antarctica trip in November, which I'm relatively optimistic is likely to go. Sylvia's asking a question about the Carnival cruise lines, and I don't know if you mean all of the group or the lines specifically. Do you have to be vaccinated? Sylvia, at this stage, we do not know the answer to that, because they haven't opened any cruises and they haven't followed Royal Caribbean or a Celebrity opening up by homeporting in the Caribbean. What we do know, though, is the 3 Carnival group lines that they opened in the UK, P&O and Cunard and Princess, are all having vaccinations when they start up. I think a lot of it will hinge around what protocols finally get agreed coming from the CDC rulings, and also what the view is now, what view the lines take around opening up. I think the model which seems to be emerging, and a big hint, is the one which Celebrity and Royal are doing, though, where they are talking about vaccinations for over 18, testing for under 18. So it's going to be interesting to see whether that becomes their enduring model or not. But we don't know the answer. We can only look at what they have done when vaccines have rolled out, I guess, which we just have to kind of eventually see. So the James asking, any talk of CDC evaluating protocols for cruises that will be sailing this spring before they make any concrete rules? Now, what's interesting, the CDC has no jurisdiction, of course, over those cruises, because they are not, they're not going to touch US waters at all. Of course, the cruise lines are not home, the ships aren't registered in the US, companies aren't operating in the US, they obviously have offices, head offices and things there. So the CDC has no jurisdiction. So I'm pretty sure, though, that they will be watching it very eagerly because, of course, you've got ships that are sailing out of the US. You've got probably American passengers mostly. Of course, they are letting all nationalities join those cruises. So it would be surprised if they don't pay very close attention to that at all, because they did seem to have disregarded the experiences from Europe. But they won't have any say in the protocols. However, the protocols that are being used are the protocols that were submitted to the CDC. So that's going to be particularly interesting. So let's have a look at this one. I have a 7-night cruise Western Mediterranean booked for August. Royal Caribbean Harmony of the Seas. Is it likely this cruise will go ahead? Unlikely I will receive both vaccines by then. Danny, this is a really interesting one because like you, I have cruises booked in June, which are possible to happen. July seems unlikely. And then I have cruises in August, feels unlikely as well because that's calling on multiple countries. I think August feels to me like it's going to be challenging because we don't know what they're going to do with Harmony of the Seas if it's going to move to Europe. So that'll be a good hint whether we see that ship being sort of sent over to Europe at any point in time. But it's going to rely, to do the Western Mediterranean, it's going to rely on Europe having opened. And it depends a little bit what happens with the third wave that's building and rollout vaccines. Rollout vaccines in Europe, which has started pretty slowly, they're now talking about only adults will have been offered vaccines by August into September time. So certainly Europe is maybe more of a challenge in terms of opening. However, many of those countries are big tourist countries, so they're pushing very hard for the EU Green Certificate, which has been agreed in principle, which will include people's information on test results, vaccine if they've had it, and if they are recovering. So a lot of that will hinge between now and June when we see that being adopted and whether and how widely it's kind of adopted. My personal view is I'm not expecting my August cruises to run. However, that's a Baltic cruise, so it's much more complicated, calling about 4 or 5 different countries. It feels much more of a challenge. So it's hard to see. And also bear in mind is, for me, one of the big indicators, and again, I've just been taking assumptions, is the fact that cruise lines are putting on these summer cruises, which are basically running until September, feels like when they feel they're going to be able to run to any degree. And you're right, the big challenge will be for a lot of people, particularly younger people, around will they have had the second vaccine or not. I think we will get more of a sense over the next month or so, because obviously, most cruise lines have cancelled now into May, July time. Actually, I mention it every time, but on my site, tipsfortravellers.com, I have a page there. It's normally the top, although I realize it's not at the top, it's the bottom of it because I had an article which came out and pushed it down, but I'll put it back at the top, where I have all the cancellations by month. And we can see there's a real push down into July and moving into August. So I would say at best it's 60-40 against based on the way things are running. And I'm certainly not expecting August to go. That cross-country movement just seems like such a challenge, particularly in Europe. So 24th, Cunard's 24th of June UK cruise. So this is, Alan, this is not one of the new cruises. If it's not one of the new cruises, then it definitely will not be sailing because they've cancelled everything. And Queen Elizabeth is the only ship that's going to be sailing those domestic cruises, which I thought were only starting on 31st of July. So no, I'm surprised that you haven't seen it's cancelled. So not. Maggie asking about solo travel. I get lots of questions about solo travel, which was great because, as you know, I travel quite a lot by myself solo. So that's great. So what's the question, Maggie? With solo occupancy being often over twice the price for a smaller / worse cabin, can I book someone else in who will then in all likely not show up to the port? So I guess what you're saying is, do you book it for 2 people and hope, and then they may actually drop out in the end. in my experience, I'm trying to think, I feel like it's happened to me where my partner pulled out of a cruise and I ended up going by myself. So I feel like that's happened, and it wasn't an issue. It was a little bit of admin issues because obviously they would normally charge 2 sets of gratuities and a few things like that. So it's more of an admin issue. The thing you'll find with most cruises you can't do is if you put somebody else on, Jane Go to travel, and then you want to change that to Jane somebody else, they often will treat that as a major change. So that's more of a challenge. But when the mega raises is quite a big one, because what I've asked for all of these startup cruises is they're all charging basically 100% occupancy. So the only difference I've found as I look at the prices as a solo, because I'm going to do all this solo, is the only thing that goes down slightly is the taxes. So you save about £50, or $70 something is all you. So you're basically paying 100% surcharge for all of these startup cruises, which is not great. Exception being Crystal, who are doing a 25% premium. So Maggie, I think I guess what you're saying is, does it make sense to book it for 2 since you're paying it anyway on the basis, and then they may drop out? I think it's fine. I would just make sure that you notify them as soon as you know that's happening. But in my experience, it shouldn't be a massive problem. KB, taking leave of faith and booked Australia, New Zealand cruise on Ovation February 2020. In the Australia updates, the only updates we have, there's not really any Australian updates other than the ban on ships in its entirety is still due to end in middle of June, and they'll take a view on that. They're working with the government, but like in the UK, to try and find a way of starting up domestically. And there is no news. It's gone very, very quiet on that front. And it's basically, I guess, stuff standing behind doors, but no news at all. But looking more and more, we have good friends in Australia, just seeing the scale of which they're opening and events and things. It feels like it's got to be coming much closer. Of course, the challenge will be bringing ships back, but there are a lot of ships still in Manila Bay, and of course all the P&O ships which are due to start sailing there, they still are scheduled around that June-July time when it reopens. So that'll be a thing to watch. So yes, Lou, late. That was my fault. Someone pointed out to me. I forgot about the 4-hour time difference, but great that you could actually join. Trish asking the question about, do you have any insight as whether we'll still have to take ship tours early next January? So Trish is referring, of course, to this thing that with the protocols opening up where you have to do cruise line only excursions. Trish, I would say the chances of that are negligible of us having to do those. We don't have to do them if things have got even worse and we've headed into 4th or 5th wave. So I think what we're going to find, I think, which is why I keep coming back to the vaccine and testing issue, is what most countries are saying currently anyway, those who are very reliant on tourism, of course, which many of the cruise ports that we call on are, is they just want to make sure that there's no risk for their population. Now, because the vaccination of their population is probably slower in many cases than it is in the West, they're increasingly looking at an entry requirement, which is as vaccines as part of it, or certainly testing. But that's a way of reducing the quarantining. I think so a lot of them are putting the vaccination policy in place. So let's take Greece, for example. So Greece is saying that they are willing to accept people from the UK with no restrictions if they have a vaccine. They're saying that to Israel. So Israel cruise passengers saying, come in, you'll be able to come in and go on tours without restrictions if you have a vaccine. So I think we'll find either it's a combination of the vaccine or some form of testing, because now all cruise ships have testing on. So I think it's very, very unlikely. I think the cruise lines are desperately hoping that as we head into September, we're going to find that having lifted, because they know that that's a massive barrier for people doing cruising. So I think it's pretty unlikely that will still be in place. One of the things I might share with you, which I haven't said, is what would be interesting to know is what people are planning to do. So I've got a good sense of what some of the people in the UK are doing, but what are you planning to do with these cruises? Are you planning to go, not go? I'm going to try and go on as many of them as I can, obviously because I also want to be able to report on them. So my plan is to go on the P&O Britannia. I'm targeting around the 10th of July. I'm sort of still booking them around cruises that I have booked, because I'd hate to book something and then some miracle happens and cruise I've got booked goes. So I'm looking at P&O Britannia, Princess on the 3rd of August. And once we see the details on Cunard, I will do the Cunard one as well. So I'm going to try and go on all those three. I'm actually focusing on the cruise lines that have vaccinations and testing, just because that feels safe. That's what I feel personally safer with. I was on sort of the shielding list in the UK, where because I am in remission from cancer, so I want to be super cautious when I start going cruising again. So I'm picking the ones that have that double whammy of testing and vaccinations. Sorry, bit aside. So it'll be interesting to know what people are planning to do. And one of the things I will actually do, which is once I know what cruises I'm on specifically, I'll make sure I post that on the channel, because of course, if other people are on the cruise, it'd be great to of course get to see you on the cruise. Although I'm guessing with the restrictions, we won't be able to just dine together or do necessarily some of the stuff that one might do normally together. But certainly, I'm sure there's ways that we can get together and meet up. Any idea if river cruises in Europe for US citizens vaccinated will actually happen this summer, June, July, August? Carol, I did in the update that went out on, where are we today? On Thursday. Right at the very end of that video, I've got a little section on river cruising. So if you might want to go to that afterwards, just in case I leave anything out in this reply. But there was a meeting of the River Cruise Association of Europe, and they are holding quite regular meetings, and there's about 50 members of those. It's a mixture of cruise lines, ports, and some of the other sort of associated kind of things around it. They had a meeting which was much more pessimistic than the meeting they'd held earlier, and they agreed to have another meeting in April. What they've said is they believe that this year is not going to be as promising as they thought it would be, because they think that Europe is not going to open up its borders as quickly as they hoped. So what they're looking at now is they're not expecting to be up and sailing to any degree by Easter, which is what they'd hoped to do. So Easter's the beginning of April, because of all these increasing lockdowns. They're hoping that they're going to be able to start running domestic-only river cruises around May-ish time, which, so for example, it would only be cruises in Germany, probably only for Germans. So German-speaking lot, you might have some stuff happening in Portugal, for example. Then what they're saying is they're hoping that borders will be open much more later in summer, so they will be able to recover some of the season for English-speaking, particularly US, UK, really around the sort of August time. So you were talking about June, July. They're much more pessimistic, but what they're saying is the advantage that they have is they can turn on really quickly. So Rudy, is it Schneider, who's one of the owners of Amel Waterway, he was claiming that they could turn on a river cruise, get it back in service within 2 weeks. So I guess we have to trust him, because they can switch it on pretty quickly. So I think what he's saying is if they saw borders lifting, if they saw things moving, they would open up as quickly as possible. But they were kind of indicating. So he said, for example, in an interview he had with Cruise Critic, he's saying he doesn't think he's going to have sailing with a lot of American stuff until August. His marketing department is saying June, and he's saying nobody actually knows. So I think we're looking more later. So what I've said to people is, if you can push like August, September timing seems more likely. Now, I did see something in the paper today where there's lots of speculation that the US might start lifting some of their restrictions for travel, sort of May-ish time, but a lot of that, of course, hinges on what Europe is going to do. And I think Europe are becoming very focused on themselves with the second wave, the slow move out of vaccinations, and so they're kind of hunkering down a bit. So I think we're not going to see a lot of news on that. I might have forgotten some bits there, Carol, so do watch that other bit of the video. Heaven L. Faraday, love your little mask emoji. We haven't heard anything to the contrary, so until we do, we assume that our cruise on Enchanted Princess, very envious. I've had Enchanted Princess cancelled on me so many times. I really want to go on that ship. In January 22 is a go. If you have cancellations, please. Absolutely. And the other thing I do with cancellations, and you might not have heard it earlier, is on my website I have constantly updated the listing by month of those changes. Enchanted Princess in January would be Mendoza, and that's what I was due to go January this year. I was due to go on Enchanted Princess. I was supposed to go originally when it first came out in 2020, then it got moved, and now I'm actually rescheduled and not on Enchanted Princess. So certainly I would know. I mean, I think I think the cruise lines are hoping everything will kind of be back where it should be by then, and certainly what we do. Alison, come back to a point about capacity. I've been trying to desperately find out through my various contacts. They're being a little bit coy on that, and it may be because they haven't agreed that perhaps with authorities, but I'm guessing we're talking between 50 and 60%. Now I need to work out, I'm going to actually go and work out how many inside cabins and ocean view cabins they are, because none of those on sale. So straight away we can strip out all of that capacity, which will give us one number. I've also heard some discussions, again, it's not directly from senior management in P&O and Princess, that there is some talk though within the industry that there is a discussion around they may be selling almost alternate cabins, so for alternate cruises. So the idea being that, say you've got a row of balconies, so you might sell every alternate one on the first cruise, then on the second cruise you sell the one in between. So that gives you time to then leave those cabins to be properly cleansed. They don't have to worry about, because normally turnaround time, you've got very little time, but if you give themselves a whole cruise, they can then properly cleanse those, clean those. So there is some discussion around that. But as I say, I don't know if that's 100% true. I'm desperately trying to find out through my contacts, and as soon as I know, because I'm really, really keen to know. And one of the reasons I'm keen is obviously so we know what it is. But just as we went into lockdown, I was on a Holland America cruise on the Zaandam, which actually ended after the shutdown. But at that time was when people were starting to madly cancel. And the ship, I'm guessing, I haven't found out, but I'm guessing the ship was probably between 50 and 60% full. And it was really fantastic in terms of, you never felt things were busy. In the theatre, there was always probably less good for the performers, but there was always loads. I mean, I had loads of space all around me, behind me, in front of me. When you went to the buffet restaurant, there was always empty tables. There was lots, and so you really had a sense of, this was before we really knew about social distancing, but you were socially distanced and you felt really, really kind of secure because you never were in big lines, you've never been in queues, even going on an excursion. So I'm guessing that's a number that works really well. But as soon as I find out, I would desperately try to find out that one. This is an interesting one because the future cruise credits is becoming really interesting, Robert. So Robert's saying that the cruise lines have so many future cruise credits in the system that I can envisage them limiting their use per each cruise, just as airlines limit free seats using air miles opening noon. Not sure what that last part means, Robert. It's going to be interesting because what we found on future cruise credits is some of the cruise lines are trying to jettison them. So Norwegian Group has moved to not giving future cruise credits, refunding cash. And I've had some people who've had Oceania cruises cancelled and they've had their money back within 2 weeks with no option of future cruise credits. And Frank Del Rio also spoke about trying to move away from future cruise credits. Partly, I think you're right, because it clogs up the system and stuff. They also have the cash to get rid of it. But also they have another agenda, which is sort of linked to your point, Robert, which is they want to try and see how much they can push pricing. Because, of course, if demand is good, if demand is high, they have much more flexibility when people are coming in with cash to buy, because they're booking based on a price. Probably if you had an Alaska cruise cancelled, if you had a Mediterranean cruise cancelled, you've got back 100. So you kind of thinking, I should be able to get a 7-week Alaska cruise at the same time for about 100. And then you go in and you try and use your cruise credit, and suddenly it's now 150. So of course there's all this argy-bargy. I have loads of people contacting me, really frustrated, because they're finding the cruises they want to go on are now much higher. So the future cruise credit, which they thought had bought them a cruise, is no longer buying them the whole cruise. So it's kind of a rambling way of saying I think the cruise lines want to kind of flush out future cruise credits as much. So I'll be interested to see whether, to your point, it's the MR thing. I think they want to get rid of those out the system as quick as possible because they want to start bringing cash back in, I would have thought. But I certainly haven't heard anything. At the moment, there are no actual limits. So you can go on into the system, look for a cabin, or get your agent to look for a cabin. It's you only apply future cruise credit at the very end. So in the checkout system, it's your card or your future cruise credit. So I don't think there's a mechanism for them stopping that. I think more the mechanism is the pricing they're putting in. I was always very skeptical. The cruise lines were giving you 125%. Virgin were giving you 200%. it always felt like there was going to be some inflation in there, because the easiest way of cancelling the 25% out is to charge more. On the good plus side, though, we are seeing, though, the prices are kind of there and pushing, you're getting much more for it. So, for example, Princess, they're launching, their cruises are all inclusive, and they've kind of slashed their Princess Plus, so you now get drinks and gratuities and Wi-Fi for not that much more within the fares. So it's really interesting to see how they're playing around with fares. Great to see you enjoying the live Q&As. It's great to know that people enjoy them. It's always hard to tell. I always take about so many people join, which is fantastic. So many people stay for most of it, and there's so many questions, so that's great to hear. And I'll keep doing them as long as people enjoy them. What I'm hoping for, though, is that eventually I'm going to stop cancelling them, or not cancelling them, postponing them because I'm away on a cruise. Wouldn't that be great? And of course, we might even try, certainly on things like Princess, some of the Royal Caribbean celebrity ships with Wi-Fi, we should be able to actually do live streams on there, which would be very, very excited. Okay, here's a good question which is raised on that point. So, Aldermere, are the P&O cruises, do they include drinks and Wi-Fi? No, they don't include drinks and Wi-Fi. So, those who don't know is Princess are launching their cruises as all-inclusive. So they've added what they call their Princess Plus, which is the add-on, which they've just slashed the price of. I think it was from $60 a day to $30 a day, which is unlimited drinks, Wi-Fi, unlimited, and gratuities, and they've kind of slashed it. But what they've done is they've bundled the prices for these cruises in. P&O haven't. However, having had some inside little sneaky looks, which I probably shouldn't have had, but managed to, at some of the pricing that will be launched in detail on Monday when these go, the P&O cruises look to be cheaper because they're not bundling as much. So it'll be interesting to see, because once you book them, I suspect we'll find that kind of, when paid for the extras, they're going to be a little bit more similar, but no. We don't know yet on Cunard what they're doing, but Cunard generally don't have all-inclusive kind of stuff. They don't even have many packages as Princess and others have. So definitely P&O are not going to bundle those at all. Oh yes, I want to raise one of the Paul and Carol rating. This I'm less keen on, but yes, as Paul and Carol was saying, which is great they've joined again. Thank you very much, Paul and Carol. P&O are often guaranteed balcony cabins, so you can book a category, not a particular cabin. So they can evenly space the cabins. So that was raising on my point. Really, really important what Paul and Carol said, very good point, is anyone who knows me knows I'm obsessed with choosing a cabin. I'm absolutely obsessed with choosing a cabin. You know, I've done 7-day cruises to date. You can never do enough. And over the time, I've learned what is really important to me about a cabin. I have to be surrounded by cabins on all sides. I have to have no interconnecting door, and that is what I absolutely go for. But you're right, P&O, Cunard, and Princess, because I've checked into all of those, you cannot book a specific cabin. You can only book a specific grade. And what they're doing is they're selling, depending on the ship and stuff. So they're either selling, I think they're selling like a standard balcony, deluxe balcony. Britannia doesn't have any suite, and even just one grade of suite. And a similar thing on Princess, although Princess is a mini cruise. But you cannot choose a cabin number. And I think Poon Cara are absolutely right. This is also presumably because what they don't want to have is everyone booking their cabins, their balcony cabins midship. So you send all this big group of people, whereas they can then spread them out across the decks, and they can spread them out across, deck-wise and that wise. And also if they are going to do, keeping empty cabins and things. So that's a really good point. Actually, if you go on these cruises, you cannot choose your cabin at all, which I find quite stressful, but anyway, I'm sure I'll survive. And in personally, absolutely, one of the biggest signs is going to be Monday morning, 8:30, and I think I've seen you posting on social media. You're going to be speed dialing at that time. It's going to be very, very interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see how much capacity that they've actually put on. Now, what I do is I do it through an agent, so she's going to have to do the whole hang on with, and I'm guessing agents probably have their own little backdoor route anyway. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what that's going to be. And I've seen a couple of people saying they're going to be rattling the phones at 8 o'clock. Elizabeth, a lot of people contact me. A lot of people have got Caribbean cruises in sort of December, cruises into January, and as we said before, I'm pretty optimistic those should be running. I think we will have found a way. A lot of it hinges, of course, around what the CDC does, but I guess the CDC at some point will start partnering with the cruise lines, absolutely at some point. Great to know. Hypnotherapy confirming that. So there, June has a 50% capacity, so 450 on board. So that's good to know. It's 50%. I don't know, but I'm guessing it's going to be that sort of level, as I think I was saying earlier. Now, this is something I've been asked a lot, Francis, which is around the world voyages. What's going to happen with world voyages in 2022? Now, the cruise lines so far have said that they are optimistic that they can run, but they do think they might have to look at some of the itineraries because, of course, a lot of the world cruises will go to places that are very out of the way and probably vaccinations won't have got that far. What we don't know yet, which I think will be extremely interesting, is what the policy will be on vaccinations for people on world cruise and their crew, because of course Cunard, Princess have not committed to having their crew because it's kind of impossible to do, be vaccinated by the time the spring cruises come. So I think it's going to be really interesting on the world cruise. Are they much more particular around that whole thing, around the whole vaccine thing? So very interesting in terms of New York opening. I mean, the big challenge again comes back to the CDC, because if the Queen Mary 2 is going to go into New York, it has to have gone through the whole CDC process. Now, as you know, they've cancelled Queen Mary 2 right through the end of October, I guess, where I think because the CDC current rules due to expire on the 1st of November. So I don't know whether they're hedging their bets, hoping that by then all that CDC process will be gone. But yeah, definitely a big one to watch. Scott, I'm going to touch on the Antarctica. A lot of people have been contacting me actually in the last week actually about Antarctica. So I guess, as you say, a lot of it's starting. People are thinking about it. Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Etc. Now, I again have an agenda, a hidden agenda, not hidden agenda. I have an interest to declare because I'm due to go to Antarctica from a cancelled trip from last year. Now, it was interesting because I did follow there was an expedition, kind of a bit like the river cruise when I was talking about earlier, where the expedition lines had a kind of a call and discussion, and they were being more pessimistic, although some of the lines were optimistic about Arctic running season, which runs around June time. Polynesian being very optimistic, others less so, and though they were pretty optimistic about Antarctica opening from November. I'm due to go in November, so you're also due to go in November. I think, again, it's going to be interesting to see what the protocols are. And obviously, if they don't want to be leaving the Shire or Montevideo, which is where I'm due to leave from, or wherever, and have any problems, because some of the more distressing things that happened and we went shut down were people down that part of the water, and then, as we know, struggling to find anywhere to dock. I have seen some of the expedition companies heading into Antarctica not committing to this, but talking about, what they're saying is a lot of them they get people will come in to a place where it's Chile or Montevideo, or wherever it is, or Shire, before the cruise. And what they are talking about is potentially creating sort of the bubble before they even start sailing. So it's going to be interesting to see whether we start finding requirements to come earlier for the cruise, or they use some of the time to test people, kind of basically not isolate, but somehow create the bubble. Bearing in mind, most of the Antarctica trips will build in 2 to 3 days for crossing Drake Passage. However, most of them do it quicker, unless it's really, really rough. So they have a little bit of fat in the system, both going to the Antarctica Peninsula and coming back. So they could actually use some of that time to create the bubble, it's on the ship or whatever. So I think I'm feeling quite optimistic. I was actually at a webinar run by Intrepid and Polar Routes on Wednesday evening, talking about Antarctica, and they were being pretty optimistic. So of course we just don't know, but they certainly feel pretty optimistic. think Paul Carroll making a good point is it's going to be interesting to see what happens on Monday and then Wednesday. But everybody knows that there are more lines still to give their details, particularly in the UK. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Really, really, really interesting. I have no idea how to pronounce this, so we'll just try. Victoria Princess, July 2021, will it sail in the Mediterranean? I touched on a little bit earlier as well. Summer in the Mediterranean for cruising is still a massive big question mark. I have a June and a July Mediterranean cruise that in my mind will not happen. Partly because I'm not sure they will send the ships over, because they might want to keep them more down Caribbean, US way if that opens. Europe opening is a big question mark at this point in time. A lot of it may depend on the itineraries. And bear in mind, all these things like Princess and stuff, they're running these sort of one-off cruises. I feel like, because these are multi-country, the way they may have to solve the riddle is by only doing one country or something like that. So I don't know, but we will get a sense really soon, because at the moment, I think I'm right in saying the Princess have cancelled their normal cruising through to June or so. So we're likely to see some kind of updates relatively soon. But I'm holding the dates, and the real crunch will come when Final Balance has to pay. And I'm reticent to pay Final Balance. I don't think it's also, but it's at best 50-50, I think less 50-50. Here's always a hard question, and I don't know if I'll be able to answer it. James saying, which cruise line that you've been on would you avoid in the future? And by which one is by far your favorite? It's really interesting, because when I get asked this question, I normally dodge it slightly by saying my favorite cruise line is the next one that I'm on, because it's always going on the next one. And a lot of it depends around, I approach cruise lines in various different ways because I'm desperate to try out all the different cruise lines, and obviously with kind of an agenda of wanting to cover them for the channel and stuff. So I look at cruising sort of like maybe in a slightly different way. If I'm going from a more, if I'm going thinking I'm not going to make videos about this cruise line, which I never end up doing, I really like going on small ships. And I really like the small ship experience. So I really like going on small ships. I find, I just like the fact that often the itineraries are a little bit more nifty. You don't have the queues, the getting on and off. It's actually easy to meet people, get to know people well. I'm not the most sociable person, actually. So small ships, I find it easy to connect with people. I just like that sort of sense. So I really like any cruise line that's got a smaller thing. The only cruise line that I have had an experience which I enjoyed the least of all, if you'd ask me what would I have the least enjoyable experience, that was on Costa Cruises. And I do feel like I need to give them another go. I didn't have a great time on Costa Cruises. I found it very brash. I know they've changed it again. I found the food okay, not great about the cabins, okay. I didn't find the entertainment that good. And that was probably about 4 years ago that I went on Costa. But that was the cruise line that I haven't, I haven't really wanted to go back and do again. But the ones that I love, are the small ships. I really also like Holland America, I like Princess, I like Cunard a lot, the sort of the mid-size. And of course, I love Seabourn, Silver Sea stuff. So I've given you a whole list there. The one cruise line is very interesting. People ask me what cruise line have I never been on? And the one which I've never been on, which I feel a little bit guilty that I've never been on, is Carnival. And I keep putting off going on Carnival because I do feel, Cruise Channel, and it's the biggest cruise line, I should really be going on Carnival. And I always put it off because it's not for me. But I do need to go on, particularly with the new ships like Mardi Gras stuff. I need to really go, and Horizon and those kind of ships. And I've never been on Regent, Seven Sea, and Viking, and Disney. Those are the ones that I haven't been on that I suspect I will really like. And I'm really, with the exception of Carnival, I'm not sure if I like, but those are the ones I've never ever been on. And there's much smaller ones I've never been on. Sorry, so that was a bit of a ramble. Okay. Bruce is asking around vaccine requirements. Bear we're still waiting for a lot of information around what proof there's going to be and how you do it. Will I be accepted with the 1 Johnson vaccine or require the 2-shot for Holland, Rotterdam? Bruce, it's a really good question, because at the moment, what we've seen in the cruise lines is what they've said, and it varies. So what Crystal have said, for example, because they're trying to track from various countries, they've said they will accept any vaccine that's approved for use and being used in the United States or in Europe. So at this point in time, that would include obviously the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, who I used to work for 24 years, by the way, so it's very exciting that they've cracked that. So the Johnson & Johnson one will be included, and I think now the EU has actually approved the J&J, so that would be included in that one, although they haven't rolled it out yet. UK is still to approve the J&J one, but I was reading again in the paper today that expecting in the next week or so. So anyone that's approved by the US or the Europe, certainly Crystal are accepting. And in the Royal Caribbean one, from what I've seen, but I haven't seen it written down, but from what I've heard is it's a similar approach. They will accept those. So if you have Sputnik 5, the Russian one, or the Indian one, which I can't remember the name of, or the Chinese one, those do not seem to be accepted as of yet. So unless they get approved within the EU, which is possible because they are looking at the Sputnik 5 one, that could be something. So I think you shouldn't worry about that. So I think you'll find, which is a very good question, is if you're saying the Rotterdam in Europe and you're from the US, I don't think you need to worry because the J&J vaccine has been approved for use. So it's more, I've had a couple of people contact me who like in Brazil and stuff like that, where they've had things like Sputnik, and it's really annoying, I can't remember the Chinese vaccine name, but anyway, it'll come back to me. Oops, let's go down and see. I'm going to scroll back very briefly and just check that I haven't. Someone said, oh, you're asking about the ship. I just saw something about, it is actually Queen Mary 2. And then up the top there, which sometimes I have because I go out high, I've got the QE2. The QE2 is the very first ship that I went on a proper cruise, so quite a magical ship. But Queen Mary 2 is here, and I got these I've had these for about 8-10 years or something. There was a guy on eBay who used to make them. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, and he used to make the most amazing models, and they weren't that expensive either. So fortunately, I can't give people links anymore because the gentleman passed away, which is a pity because these are just, I mean, it's a different thing to say, not because of the models. I mean, but he is so talented, and they're just so magical, and they were just they weren't that expensive, so it was quite something. And I've been looking actually for models like this around, particularly if you go to maritime museums, they have the most amazing models, of course, on ships. I want, it's probably just where I can't find them, but if you ever find great ship models like this on sale somewhere, then always let me know, because I do want more. My dear partner is less keen on that, which is why they end up being in my sort of study part. So I want to come back to proper questions rather than my ship models. So Mary Josie Tremblay, great name. For the Queen Mary 2, is it worth the extra price for Princess Grill versus Britannia Club? My short answer would be yes, but it depends. I'll tell you why I think it is. The Britannia Club, just for those who don't know, so on Queen Mary 2, it's a little, all the Cunard ships are a little bit segregated, it's a little bit old school. So you have Britannia, which is the big, beautiful sort of Art Deco-y restaurant. That's like the main big dining where most people on the ship will dine. Then they created Britannia Club, which I guess if you're using a analogy of an airline, is sort of like a premium economy or whatever they call that thing. And then you've got sort of business, which would be Princess, and then you've got First, which would be kind of Queen's Grill. So there is a difference when you go from Britannia Club. And the great thing about Britannia Club is you have single seat dining, so you can eat whenever you want. You don't have those fixed timings. So particularly on a very long cruise, it's great to not be locked into having early dining or late dining. It's quite a small restaurant. It's a nice restaurant. But then you go to Princess Grill, where you have the beautiful Princess Grill dining room, which is magnificent. You do have a bigger menu. You have more of a chance to order off menu, although they tend to try and keep that more for Queen's Grill, but you can do that in Princess Grill. But you then also have access to the lounge, the Grill's Lounge, so both Queen's Grill and Princess Grill have that. You also get faster check-ins. You have the Grill's check-in procedure. The cabins are bigger. They're slightly better location. So that's another plus. So it is kind of worth the difference if you just want to have it. It's a grander experience. It's like a more pampered kind of feeling experience. So you're paying a little bit for that, and bigger cabins and stuff. So Gary's saying, we've got a French Polynesian cruise with Port Gauguin in July 2021. Do you think this might happen? So far they haven't cancelled it. Now, Port Gauguin, I just saw it this week. They've just come out. The ship's actually, I think, in Singapore at the moment. It's just been through a refit, which it kind of needed. I went on Port Gauguin, it's more than a year ago now. It was the summer before. And I mean, the ship is very beautiful, but it is a pretty old ship, which is why Pernod are going to bring along some more ships to basically get rid of those. So they've done a big revamp on it. It's not clear. I think you're right. I haven't heard when it's due back in service. And French Polynesia sort of was open and then it's closed. So I think a lot of it's going to hinge around what the French Polynesian entry requirements are going to be. If you remember when they first entered service, they had a sort of a bit of a false negative issue and kind of got pulled out of service for a while. So the ship will be back in French Polynesia in time for that, but they haven't actually said, I haven't read anywhere on the plans. So I think a lot of it will hinge around French Polynesia opening now because of what's happening in France. They're reliant on France. They may have tighter restrictions, but they were having, you had to have your PCR tests and all that sort of stuff. It feels like it's opening. I think I've seen Windstar they've just pushed it back actually, but Aranui, which is the other one that sails there, which is locally owned, they are sailing in July. So there's definitely some movement there. So Carol's asking about the VAC passport card for use as traveling in Europe. In the US, we're given an index card listing the dates of our vaccinations, handwritten, no testing info, just jabs. Carol, I don't know the answer to that, but I know it's being looked at. I mean, I was quite surprised actually, because of course in Europe, certainly in the UK, is your vaccinations linked to your national health number. So there is a database. I mean, I can actually look, if I get my phone and I go into the NHS app, which I won't do because I switched my phone off, but if I go into the NHS app on my phone, have a screensaver of a ship as you'd of a sea day, in my NHS app, which is then linked to my GP, I can already see all the vaccinations, all the medications. So it already shows my first dose in there in the app. So that's all held and linked to the number. And that number is then, which is what the same as across Europe. So they use that number from the database to populate many of these things. So I hadn't realized until recently that there appears to be no database. So I don't know whether there's any other way that's linked to social security number. I don't know quite how the system works. So I don't know. I did notice though, that the Royal Caribbean, in their documentation, they were talking about the form of proof. They did talk about that card you were talking about, which seems really open to abuse and fraud, counterfeits and stuff. They refer to the various apps that are being developed across Europe, etc. So I don't know specifically, but that'll be worked on, and I guess we will hear as that kind of rolls out. And I think we'll also hear much more, perhaps on what the other scenarios are in the middle of April. In the middle of April, the UK task force due to report back on the whole, what they're doing with vaccinations and the ID cards. So I think we'll probably hear much more on that. Josh saying, good question. Can you do a TUI cruise? Is that the one going on next year? I want to see your thoughts. I haven't done TUI. That's a good one. I haven't done TUI. Morella is the UK brand, and it's another one on my list. You're absolutely right. I realize we're right up against time, and I try and keep to the hour. So I will just answer one or two quick questions. Because there's quite a lot of questions coming in, so I will try and answer those before we close. European river cruises, why companies like Viking still selling June cruises? Is this realistic? I'm sure June, Amsterdam to Budapest. Is that likely? Richard, you might join a little bit later, but I did cover some of the updates where they're saying they may be sailing, but more for EU people. It depends a lot on whether it's opening. They are still hoping to sell them. I suspect we're going to hear really, really soon on Viking cancellating, because they tend to cancel their ocean and River at the same time. I have an ocean in June. I suspect we're going to hear from them pretty soon on cancelling. I suspect June will absolutely go. Sailing out of Bahamas in June, we have Crystal Serenity, which is part of Crystal, and we have Adventure of the Sea with Royal Caribbean. So there are a whole bunch more questions. We've gone way over time, and I will try, as I've always done, head back and take a look at the questions, try and cover them either in the update video or certainly kind of cover them as we go into the next week. Thanks. Next week? Yeah, next week's live stream. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you've found it really helpful. Remember, you can also drop me an email or leave a comment, and I try and answer as many of those as quickly as I possibly can. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully you've answered some of your questions. So have a great rest of your weekend, and hopefully I want to see some of you at sea pretty soon.